Hey everybody, this is Josh from AirOps, do content and SEO here. I'm super excited to have Kevin Indig join us today. Kevin, how's it going?
Really good now. I'm excited for this.
Yeah, for sure. We got a really good topic today. We're recapping all of research that Kevin has done, AirOps has done, and then of course we're going to get into some bold predictions as well. So this is going to be a fun one to end the year. You may know Kevin Indig. He has spent 10 plus years building and running growth teams at multiple companies, specializes in SEO and CRO and growth strategies. And at the bottom there, he's an international speaker. And Kevin shared recently with me that he presented about SEO in German. And I was super impressed with that.
It
No
was a good
comment.
time. Yeah, the comment exactly. There's the
I can
Germanness. All
barely get
clear.
my head around SEO in one language, much less two. So that's super impressive.
Fine.
Yeah, yeah. So what is on our agenda today? We are going to be talking about, like I said, an end of year recap, but hitting on some key questions here. What makes content stand out in LLMs? Do community signals matter? What's behind mentions and citations? And then a question we're probably all wondering, is AI search unpredictable? And then at the end, we're going to get into fun stuff, 2026 predictions. So before we dive into that, though, I want us to think about, are you ready to win AI search? If so, you can get one-on-one help from the AirOps team to apply some content strategies to your own site. Plan your AI search strategy session, see examples of proven AI search workflows, preview the AirOps Insights dashboard, and receive an AI search and action plan plus next steps. If you are interested in that, please email us at growth@airops.com and put webinar. I can't spell webinar today in the subject line. That would be great. You can also scan that QR code. We'd be happy to walk you through all of some workflows that we have and see some examples of that. So without further ado, we're going to dive into some research that we have and the predictions. If you do have a question, I'm going to ask that you put it in the Q&A section so I can just see it a lot easier. That would be helpful for me. Yes, the recording and will be available and be sent to your email. All right. So with that, we are going to kick it off. First big question that we have, what makes content stand out in LLMs? And what does the research say? One of the things is that if your content is 3x more likely to get cited if it's less than 3 months old. Kevin, what are we seeing here? Why does freshness matter so much specifically for LLMs?
So the way that LLMs work is that they have a training data cutoff, meaning the new models are trained up on until a certain moment in time. And for everything after that moment in time, they need to retrieve information from the web. Interestingly, they're very fast at this. They're really good at this also. And they have a whole kind of vetting process. So before retrieving a whole web page, for example, they might look at the metadata, like the meta title or the URL, and kind of gauge if they could potentially find the information they're looking for. What's also really interesting, and this is something that you found out in the research, is that this freshness factor, this importance of freshness, stretches across all different types of user intent. So whether you are looking for information or you want to purchase a product, you are evaluating a product, you're comparing products, it doesn't matter. LMs always prefer fresher information, which of course for you and for everybody else and for myself means that we need to find ways to keep our content inventory fresh. I think the obvious call here is to use like a content refresh workflow from AirOps. The other question is also like, how do you know when content is not fresh enough? And so you offer this timeline of 3 months. I think that's probably like a really good broad industry average. And it might also make sense to take a look at how is your content performing in search. So not necessarily in LMs, but in search, just to get a signal to see, okay, could this maybe need another update, which then obviously also has a beneficial impact on LMs because they lean so heavily on search engine results.
And what we're seeing too is that it also depends on what industry you're in, could also demand some different refresh cycles. So one thing I like to point out is if you're in a long-standing industry like medical, especially, your treatment for certain diseases is not going to like change overnight. Whereas some things around in SaaS specifically, there's updates and feature updates and things like that. So it may also depend on your industry.
Absolutely depends. Industry and use case, sure. An evergreen topic that barely changes, right? Like has a much lower requirement for freshness than something that is cutting edge, right? If you're writing about AI, it can probably change by the minute. If you're writing about, I don't know, maybe insurance or so, maybe the desire to change frequently is much, much lower.
Yeah, and we had this call out here at the bottom about commercial search demanding a higher bar for freshness. Why are we seeing that?
We're seeing that because it also depends a bit on what time horizon you're looking at. For example, now over Black Friday, Cyber Monday, the need for freshness is through the roof. That's probably the highest it will be throughout the whole year. But people have different needs at different times and they want new products. And it can be embodied in even things like reviews, right? So if you're thinking about the need for freshness, what does that actually mean? It doesn't necessarily mean different products. It can just also mean that there is fresh information about the product, fresh reviews on publishers, fresh reviews on product landing pages, right? And so I think the challenge and the key to success for companies, whether in B2B or B2C, is to keep information about your product and services as fresh as humanly possible. And for e-commerce products, for shopping, that could mean having regular reviews, maybe on your site. In B2B, that could just mean a groomed log of all the updates and new features and making that easily accessible to LLMs.
Yeah, we have a couple good questions in the chat or in the Q&A that I want to go ahead and answer right now. Monica from McKesson asks, what signals do LLMs use to determine how new content is? Is that like site map timestamps? Is it like the published date or the modified date? What are some of your recommendations to signal to either Google or in the LLMs that your content is actually fresh? Is there any like technical like things that we need to do there?
It's such a good question. And the answer is a little, I don't know, funny or ironic or all of the above. But long story short, publish date seems to matter a lot. So much so that there are some tests that actually have shown that just updating your publish date without making any other change can actually help you with visibility in LMs. Now, I'm not sure if should you test that? Yes, you should. Should you roll that out across the board? I think it's not super helpful for two reasons. One is don't forget that search engines are also looking at your content. And if you manipulate the publish date, they will just ignore it and probably mistrust your site more. And second, LLMs will probably add more quality filters throughout the next 12, 24, 36 months to make sure that those easy manipulation tactics don't work any longer. But the reality is right now, it's very simple.
I'm going to go ahead and ask this question too. Would you say the refresh is also for like pages that are product pages or like your homepage, things like that? Should you also be keeping those up to date?
It depends a little bit on how much the topic changes. Again, if you're an AI vibe coding tool or just, I don't know, an AI coding IDE tool or whatever, your product pages should probably adapt with the flow of the industry and new developments, right? So a way to embody that could be with FAQs on your product landing pages at the bottom. Maybe those should have a higher change frequency, whereas the rest of your content can stay the same for a longer time.
Yeah, these are great questions. Keep them coming. Thank you for that. And then part of keeping your content up to date is also having really good structure. Why do you think structure matters so much for your content appearing in LLMs?
So LLMs are really good at making sense of context. But the easier you make it for them, the more that reflects in how visible you are for them. So LLMs thrive on structure, and it can be simple structure like headings, but also tables, lists, and bullet points, etc. I've seen some funny tests lately where people have tried to like literally upload a page that it's barely readable for humans. It's just bullet points and tables, and it performs really well in LLMs. And that is in large part because it's easier to make associations between topics in a text and the context in a text, meaning the semantics, when it is very clearly structured, right? The more hierarchy you bring into this, and the easier it is to figure out the connections between text, for example, in a table, the easier it is for LLMs to parse and understand what you're looking for. The more, like the opposite of that would probably be a novel, right? Where you have a lot of storytelling, you have a lot of disassociated context to create the tension that you want in a novel. So I think those would be two great things to put against each other, a novel and a database.
Yeah, that comparison makes a lot of sense. Do you think we should create content just for the LLMs, or should it have a blend of LLMs and like human readability? I think this is a question that we're all dealing with.
Honestly, I don't know, but I'm working with a bunch of companies that are testing this right now. because reality is that there's no law yet, no guidelines saying you cannot cloak for LLMs. And so some tests that I am running with companies is to literally cloak a page for LLMs, where LLMs see a bare bones version of the page with a lot more context, and then users and search engines see the regular version. That again, like this is a test, and I don't know the answer to this yet. So be very careful with how you roll this out and how you approach this. But the short answer is we don't know yet.
Yeah, I love that. I'm assuming if you want to find the answer to that, go ahead and subscribe to Kevin Indig's growth memo reel. Drop that in the chat there. And that's a great place to keep up with everything that Kevin's writing and producing. Our next topic is going to be around how do community signals really matter to LLMs? And we have some really great research that AirOps has done this year, Ocean and our team, and Kevin has put together specifically on this too. So first off, we're seeing that UGC has a huge impact on answers in AI search. What is the data showing us here?
It is, to me, it's the big paradox of AI, right? On the one hand, this is synthetic knowledge. And on the other hand, it depends so much on human conversational knowledge, if you will. Now, the reason that UGC has such a big influence is actually pretty simple. LLMs right now in their form are conversational. We're having a back and forth conversation with them. UGC on platforms like Reddit is also conversational. That makes it so attractive as a training ground because LLMs can understand what a real conversation looks like when it's between humans, right? So you also have that sometimes in video. One of the reasons for why YouTube is highly cited, not just because of the content quality, which is on average, I would say fairly high on YouTube, but also because you have webinars, right? You have podcasts. What we're doing right now is a great training ground for LLMs. And the question, of course, is, cool, what does that mean for us? And it plainly means you want to be present in that training data and retrieval data as much as possible, right? What you and I are doing, Josh, right now, for example, helps AirOps be more present in LLMs when it comes to some of the topics that we're discussing. And on the other hand, the more present you are on Reddit and the sentiment and context that you're present in also, of course, has a massive influence. And interestingly, it has the highest influence when people are closest to converting, meaning when they get closest to purchasing.
Yeah, we're also seeing, I love your point there about LLMs mimicking conversation. Essentially, I haven't really thought of it that way. And we're also seeing Reddit in particular, Quora, some other forums also influence sentiment. Why is Reddit such a big validation for community and for peers and why is it such a big source of validation, I guess is the best way to put it.
Reddit, funny enough, is the oldest forum on the web. Oldest and largest forum. Okay, maybe somebody knows an even older forum, so I should probably be careful with my word choice here, but it's the oldest, largest forum on the web. And Reddit really is a collection of thousands and thousands of communities rather than this one big community. If you've ever been pretty active and engaged on Reddit, you can tell how passionate some of these communities are about Reddit. And that goes to show how much content there is to find and how specialized the content is on Reddit, right? Like I'm not aware of, besides Wikipedia, any other site that has such a broad span of different topics and at the same time so much depth.
Yeah, I think we had a good question come in the chat. I know there's been some back and forth over the past year about Reddit being cited in ChatGPT or not. It's obviously, looking at this chart here, still a big part of Perplexity, but also Google AI mode, which has a large number of traffic and users, or growing number, I should say. What do you think Reddit is still an important place for people to invest?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. I think my explanation to Perplexity in AI mode is that both of them obviously lean very heavily on search, on Google search, right? Perplexity is basically an AI on top of Google search, if you will. Probably doing them a bit of disservice, but you get the point.
Yeah.
And then obviously AI mode is directly from Google. And because Google prioritizes Reddit so highly, that to me is the explanation. ChatGPT leans higher on Bing, and Reddit is not present on Bing at all because Reddit blocks all bots with a few exceptions. But that being said, we obviously have to make an important distinction here between the training data and web retrieval. And so for web retrieval, I think just replay what I just said. For training data, Reddit also has a high importance, right? Especially in the earlier models, there are these famous stories about how early ChatGPT versions basically prioritize anything on Reddit that had, I think, at least one or two upvotes. So anyway, important distinction to be made, and Reddit plays an important role in both of these.
Yeah, love that. You mentioned this a little bit too about YouTube and the importance of that we're seeing in search. These stats really stand out to me for how important YouTube is becoming as a channel.
Yeah, totally. And the fact here that the citations reflect learning intent so heavily makes perfect sense because we're seeing the same thing on Google, right? In classic search, keywords that have a how-to component or a how-to intent or learning intent have a much, much higher chance of featuring a YouTube video very prominently at the top. So YouTube is the best learning source in many cases, and that reflects on LMs as well.
So when we're talking about learning intent here, we're thinking about like how-to guides, explainers, tutorials, that sort of content. Is the LLMs are really going to YouTube for that, for those answers?
Yeah, yeah, correct. LMs and search engines as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So like you said previously, investing in YouTube is a great place to really hit on, I would say like that middle funnel type content, that how-to content, really important there. Okay, so now our next topic and where our research is going to be is what's behind mentions and citations. Would just like to say if you are interested in getting an AI search strategy and see some examples of workflows, feel free to email us at growth@airops.com and put webinar in the subject line. We're happy to walk you through some examples of what some other companies have done. And so now we are walking into what's behind mentions and citations and taking a look at the research here. So right off the bat, we have a couple research studies on this. 85% of brand mentions in AI search are coming from third-party content. And when I first saw this stat, this was really surprising to me.
Yeah, same here. And when I read a bit more about the research, which is fantastic, by the way, it made more sense to me because these 85% are coming from commercial queries. And so what took me a while to understand, but what is pretty clear to me right now is that there is a different mix of mentions and citations, let's just call them sources for now, a different mix of sources based on how strong the purchase intent is of a user. So the more they want to buy a service or product, the more LLMs, predominantly ChatGPT, will show them sources that are third parties. And it makes sense, right? If you think about it, because if you're just evaluating a product, you're totally fine reading, say, the offline world, a brochure or a catalog from the seller. But the closer you get to actually pulling the trigger, the more you want to lean on independent reviews or opinions to make that call. And LLMs reflect that, right? So the higher the purchase intent, the more commercial the prompt, the more you get sources in the form of citations and mentions from third parties like review sites, Reddit, and publishers.
And digital PR also plays into this, right?
Yeah, totally. I think I'd say digital PR is the lever to make this, to move the needle here. Sure, affiliate partnerships, paying for listings, all that stuff as well. But at the end of the day, getting the word out about your product so that other sites and UGC platforms cover it or write about it is the way to go.
This is one of those things that was an SEO best practice that I didn't see a lot of people necessarily like always investing in maybe in the way they should, but now it's just the data is showing us that it's actually like super important to always have this as a motion, really as part of your search strategy and not just like a PR strategy.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And it's interesting how like AI blurs the lines between teams and channels, right? So now SEOs should be talking a lot to affiliate and partnership managers, to social media managers, to biz dev, PR, and brand teams. So it's all mixed together.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and ask this question from Jeff. He says, do LLMs care if those third-party domains are direct competitors of your brands, especially when we're thinking about like SaaS brands, things like that?
They will look, I have to look into the data, right? I think there's an analysis to be had here. But from what I've seen so far, they lean much more on non-competitors like publishers, UGC platforms, review sites, etc. LMs are good at understanding that these are third-party platforms, not competitors. They're pretty good at associating that.
Yeah, love that distinction. Another interesting point here is the role of link equity. You're a lot more familiar with this than I am. Why don't you go ahead and walk us through this a bit?
Yeah, sure. So I did this research into the role of backlinks across different dimensions. Does it matter if it has a high, if the source that is, let me backtrack this. I looked at 1,000 websites at different link metrics like DR and UR and like a spam factor and index, no index, follow, no follow, etc. And then correlated that with AI visibility metrics like mentions, citations, share of voice, et cetera, et cetera. And interestingly, what I found amongst others is that links in itself matter for AI visibility, but what matters less is whether they're set to follow or no follow. This like classic SEO distinction, right? SEOs would usually go after links that are not set to no follow, do follow links. But for LMs, that's not true at all. And you could argue that Google has changed its ways about that as well a little bit. So I wouldn't rule that out completely. But long story short, LLMs evaluate links differently than search engines. Another interesting highlight that came out of this research was that, for example, image links sometimes work better than just regular text links when it comes to the impact on AI visibility. So they're important, yes. I would say, as a follow-up research, I want to look into the difference between backlinks and unlinked web mentions, because I have a suspicion that they could also, they could be almost equal. But for this research specifically, there's no distinction between follow or no follow.
That's really fascinating. When you're saying image backlinks, are you saying like it's the image is hosted on another site and by your hosting or putting it on your site? What do you mean by image backlinks?
It is a linked image compared to a linked word or linked text.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. And we're also seeing that mentions also have a big role as far as staying power within LLMs.
Yes, this, as you clearly show here, like this differentiation between is it linked or is it not linked is just not that important for LLMs. For them, it is like whether your brand shows up or not, and in what context, that matters so much more. Whether it's linked or not, it could make a small difference, right? But again, I want to do some like a little bit of follow-up research here. And yeah, as you can clearly see here, like the returns are really in being cited and being mentioned at the same time.
So what's your suggestion for teams who maybe have traditionally invested a lot in trying to get backlinks, optimizing that anchor text from third-party sites, things like that? What's your recommendation right now as far as maybe a backlink strategy or a mention strategy they should pursue?
First of all, I think the hard anchor tags matter less and less. Brand links are really where it's at. Two, I would rather have a mention than no backlink, right? So I wouldn't try to get a backlink or nothing. I would say, okay, if we don't get a backlink, then a mention is maybe as good, but at least more worth than not being present at all. And then second, of course, the context matters. I think good ways to get there are digital PR, publishing research, and amplifying that research. But any unique data that either confirms or disproves a strongly held belief will get a lot of attention and coverage if we do it well. Pair that with some nice charts and graphics and all that kind of stuff. Keep the production value fairly high, and then have a good seeding strategy, including some paid amplification. That recipe works really well and also gets you some nice brand coverage.
Yeah, great points. Okay, now moving on to our next topic here. Something I think we've all felt a bit. AI search feels unpredictable. Is it? Let's look into some of the research data that we do have. First, the data does show that AI search is quite volatile.
Yeah, by the way, I love that research. I think that was filling such an important gap. Also, from my understanding of LLMs, right? Because we often derive how LLMs work from search engines. Anyway, what we're seeing here is really interesting because it turns out that when you run the same prompt consecutively, say 5 times in a row or so, the outcome changes. And it goes back to the probabilistic nature of LLMs. These are not deterministic search engines where it's really important that the outcome is always the same. LLMs, for them, it's statistical, right? It's probabilistic. There's a likelihood that a certain outcome is similar, but it's not the same every time. And so what we're seeing here is that after 5 consecutive runs, less than 10% of the same content is cited, right? And so when we're looking at citations and mentions, it's a bit higher, is about 20%, but it just goes to show that we cannot use the same SEO mindset of ranks and apply it to LLMs. It does not work that way, right? Besides the fact that prompts are about 5 times longer than search keywords, but we cannot think about LLM answers as a rank. We have to think about it differently. And the difference is in a probability that you're showing up, not a guarantee.
Yeah. I'm going to ask the obvious question then. What are we supposed to do if it's not as predictable maybe as it used to be? I have a couple ideas, but very interested in what you would have to say.
Yeah. So when we're talking about probability, then we need to solidify the average of that probability, right? So what you're seeing here is this flattening curve. And in an ideal world, the way we measure prompts is not with a single response, but consecutive response, and we take the average share that we show up in these prompts. That's essentially it. And over time, that share or baseline should go up. Now, I think our tooling is slowly developing into that direction, or our telemetry. So if you're building your own telemetry, you might be able to execute on that faster. But I'm expecting more of the AI visibility industry to move to consecutive runs of prompts rather than running the same prompts once a week.
Yeah. I love that mindset. At AirOps, we do have an insights dashboard that we can give you a preview of, where we are tracking like your mention rate, your citation rate, your share of voice, how you appear in those models. If you want some more information on that, Maria, if you could drop us a link to the insights page, and that'll give you a good overview of some of the AirOps capabilities there. And then we're seeing some similar volatility in AI overviews. That's obviously an important search surface as well. What are some of the trends that we're seeing on AI overviews? I know you've done a lot of research this year.
Yeah, totally. There's a bunch of stuff happening. The first thing I want to call out is that AI overviews are also an LLM, right? So they're powered by
Mhm.
Gemini, by a distinct Gemini model, but we're seeing that same probabilistic behavior here where they might not always be the same. Now, Google has an interest in reducing the variance and volatility in AI overviews as much as possible because it is still a product that lives in the classic search environment, right? So there is an interest to keep it more steady. But when you look at AI mode, for example, we're seeing the same behavior as in ChatGPT. Anyway, back to topic. There's a difference between showing up in search rankings and AI overviews, meaning AI overviews don't just pick from the top search results. They might pick from the top 100 or top 50 for all we know. So it's not a requirement to show up high in the classic search results to be present in AI overviews. It helps. Like when we look at the trend, it directionally helps, but it's not a hard requirement. What matters so much more is whether you have the right information on your page, whether you satisfy the search intent, and whether your content is very similar or associable with the prompt or the query that people are asking.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that on our end as well, especially with the fresh content being in the AI overviews. If you're interested in kind of more of a deep dive on some Google algorithm changes in AI overviews, I had Lily Ray on a week or two ago. She went super deep on this. We can drop the recap in the chat. Maria, if you could do that. She also talked a lot about this. So back to my kind of question a little bit earlier is, what do we do with all these changing landscape with so many shifts? How do we create content that really wins in AI search?
Yeah, totally. So I think there's a couple of things to say about this. One, of course, is this notion of writing for humans. At the end of the day, LLMs are slowly becoming an interface for consuming content, but people still go to websites, right? And so it's important to write for humans so that when humans come to transact or verify or validate, they're not caught off guard and they're seeing this like wall of bullet points and tables, right? Keep that in mind. The other thing is we already mentioned structure. We mentioned the importance of freshness, right? So these are systems and stylistics that you want to adopt and codify, right? Like you might want to rethink what your content brief looks like and what your page templates look like. Build structure into your page templates, whether we're talking about a product landing page, a blog article, a category page, or whatever you have. And then this idea of like authoritative content is really important because at the end of the day, LLMs emulate this concept of EAT. They don't use the same thing, but they try to emulate it because they're looking for highly authoritative knowledge that is, I think, public knowledge about LLMs for a long time. But they're also looking for expertise and for sharing a human point of view. The fact that LLMs are citing Reddit so much and these human conversations goes to show that they have an interest in actually citing or bringing a human experience to the answer. And then there's the whole notion of what I call webbutation, which is all the offsite stuff, all the mentions, all the backlinks, right? So the three pillars are the content that you produce on your site, the content that shows up on other websites, and the authority and angle that you embody in both of them.
Yes, and if you want more in depth on this, we do have our content, AI search content playbook. I believe that is in the chat that you can reference as well. But I love these steps here. This is a very actionable thing that you can take to into 2026 as you start planning your content and your SEO strategy. We are going to move on a bit to 2026 predictions. If you do have questions for Kevin, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. I'm getting a lot in the chat. It's hard for me to follow. So if you do have questions, we are going to have time for questions at the end. But this part is really great. Kevin recently published, I believe, how many predictions on your growth memo?
I think we're going up on 7.
Okay, 7 or so. Yeah. And we are going to profile a few here. And these are really outstanding as we think about the future. So, Kevin, we're wrapping up 2025. We have all that great research. Now we're moving into 2026. I just saw in your growth memo that you actually talked about your 2025 predictions and if you got them right or wrong. I haven't read that yet, but before we dive into 2026, anything you want to mention there?
Well, I just want to say that this is an exercise for me. I'm having a lot of fun with this, but I have no illusion that I'll be right or that I know what's happening. This is a mental exercise just to push myself a little bit to think about what could be next, but then also to train that muscle. And that's why why I evaluate my former predictions and why I also score them. And I, for example, had higher hopes about agents for this year. My prediction was that in 2025, we're going to see 100 million users of AI agents. That was a miss, obviously, because you could define deep research as an agent, but I was more so thinking about agents that are taking action for you, like booking a ticket or making a reservation in a restaurant or something along these lines. So that clearly didn't happen. But then there were other things that I think like were coming true in the form that I predicted. For example, we see a lot more AI victims. Their whole industries where the companies and the stock indices tracking them are trending downwards pretty hard, right? Where we've seen Czech was a pretty prominent example of this year, but then also companies that are doing translations or other kind of outsourcing business functions been trending downwards. So I think this year was a pretty decent mix of hits and misses. If I remember correctly, I think I had 5 hits, 3 misses, and 2 that were mixed bags. So I usually trend around that. It's 50-50 right or wrong. And sometimes I'll say stupid things and sometimes I say smart things. And again, the value is an exercise, not to be right or wrong.
Yeah, I'm glad that you were honest and upfront and went back to your own predictions. Not everybody does that, so really appreciate that. Again, check out the growth memo. You can just Google Kevin Indig growth memo. I think we've also put it in the chat to see some of his 2025 results, but also to see his 2026 predictions, which we're going to give a preview here. So first off, out of the gate, and AI visibility only tools need more than just visibility. Kevin, what are you thinking about for this prediction?
Yeah, totally. So this year we've seen that the pure insights about how you're visible in LLMs, not judging about the quality, right? But just the pure insights have been pretty commoditized this year. On the one hand, I'm seeing a lot of startups, small companies going after this, or even some bigger companies, right? But I've probably gotten, I think this year, no joke, about 1 DM on LinkedIn per week about somebody building an AI visibility tracker. So there are hundreds out there. And then on the other hand, you had Amplitude. They built an AI visibility tracker and gave it away for free to their customers. And of course, you had SEMrush and Ahrefs also more or less weaving that into their product, sometimes for an upcharge, but in some cases at a very low price point. So I think that's not the alpha. That's not where the biggest returns for these companies are. Where I see a lot more of a mode of a defense, of a defensible business model is in helping with the outcome, right? So AirOps is a great example of that. I mentioned that in the article as well, where AirOps actually allows you to create content, refresh content, do a whole bunch of other stuff, right? And so that is much more related to an actual output. And if you're an executive right now, right, budgets are still pretty wonky. In many cases, they're being cut. It's easier to justify higher spend on tooling when you can tie it to the output of an FTE, of a full-time employee, right? So if you can say, not that I want to advocate for people being fired or laid off and then replaced with AI, which I think is a terrible idea. But just from a thinking perspective, right? If you say, okay, I pay X amount of dollars for something like AirOps, and that gets me maybe 50% of the output from a full-time employee, that might cost me maybe $70,000 to $120,000, depending on where you live. That is a good way to reason, and it makes a lot of sense. Whereas just knowing how you perform on LLMs is a good start, right? But it's harder to justify a higher investment for that.
Yeah, AirOps definitely started with building out workflows for content and SEO teams to help with refresh, to help with like internal linking, to help with editorial briefs, to help with outlines, all of those things. And that's where we really honed in on the concept of like content engineering to help stitch some of those things together. Because you really do need to take action beyond just those visibility metrics. Though we do have a visibility insights that you can check out, but it's like, what do you do with those? You really have to take action on it. So love that prediction and those points. And then thinking about ChatGPT, here's a bold prediction as well.
Yeah, look, like it's pretty wild. Anybody can go out and publish listicles on their own site or the company's site saying that they're the best. And LLMs picked that up fairly well, unfortunately. So I think it goes to show that maybe up until 26, let's see what ChatGPT does next year. I have some thoughts, but I think up until now, LLMs are comparable to the very early phases and years of Google, where you could spam a lot and you can manipulate a lot. And I get the impression that they're aware of this and they're seeking to fix that. Now, it's harder to say how much of that actually arrives at customers. I think it's a bit trickier to say how much of that is being filtered out right now already, but I think it's pretty clear to say that it's time for LLMs, especially ChatGPT, to adopt more quality filters themselves. I previously mentioned this idea of EAT. I think that is one example, but the thing is that the technology is already there. So there are research papers showing this whole agent critic idea or agent evaluation idea, where essentially you have a part of the system, a part of the LLM that retrieves content from the web. And then you have another part that judges that content against different criteria. So one criteria could be, hey, is this coming from a listicle that was published on the website that belongs to the brand that the prompt is about, right? Or that are we just going to filter that out? Same, for example, with a, say, certain subreddits or with a certain age of a Reddit post. So there's all these kind of heuristics that you can apply to these agent evaluation, agent critic systems. And you can also get them in some cases already from, say, Amazon AWS. They already have products like that. So I think it's pretty straightforward and logical to expect that next year LLMs will be more critical in what type of content they use for training data and for web retrieval.
Yeah, I really like that prediction as far as a much needed update for sure around quality. And then this one was really fascinating to me. The dark web defense and that AI overviews will continue to increase. What are you thinking about with this prediction?
Where I'm coming from is that clicks are basically dying out, right? If you're looking at clicks in a lot of cases, it's a pretty steep downward trend. As one of my memos this year, I looked at 3 of the largest sites on the web by traffic. I looked at Reddit, YouTube, and Wikipedia, and all of them show that they almost have 50% of their keywords showing AI overviews. And the biggest traffic killer on the web are AI overviews. And I expect that next year we're going to see closer to 75, maybe 80% of keywords showing AI overviews. And that will obviously reduce the number of clicks even more. And as a response, I think whatever is left of the open web, I think we can almost count the platforms on one hand, but you have stuff like Substack, WordPress, Medium. Then you have some of the bigger publishing houses and some of the bigger affiliates. And that's, I would say, pretty much it. Maybe some forums, sure, Reddit, etc. But even Reddit has closed off more. So maybe you cannot even count that as part of the open web. But whatever is left, I think is going to close down more and more. And it's going to lead to this kind of dark web where a lot of what used to be the open web now happens behind closed gates. It could be that it's just gated with an email. It could be that there's a paid gate. It could be pay per crawl. But this idea of information being just accessible for anyone, I expect that to die more next year. We've seen that, for example, a lot of websites, publishers, bloggers, etc., were unaware that their content lives on Common Crawl, and then boom, around comes an OpenAI and a Google, and they train next-gen technology on that content without really giving anything back. And I think all of these reasons together will tip a lot more sites to quote-unquote gate or close down and become part of what I call the open dark web.
What are you seeing as far as like user interactions with AI overviews?
So users use AI overviews as a fact sheet. They use it to quickly gather the information that they're looking for. They're still clicking on organic search results, which is really important to keep in mind. because it means that we can still influence purchase decisions by showing up in classic search results, but measuring that is so much more difficult because we are in that transition from high click volumes to lower clicks or low click volumes. And once we're arriving at lower clicks, and maybe at some point no clicks anymore, but with lower clicks, it's going to be easier to then say, hey, every click that still comes through is of really high intent. But for now, we're in that weird transition, which makes clicks as a metric really difficult. And so the behavior that we see is organic search results still matter a lot. Proving that is hard. So maybe monitoring your ranks might actually be a better idea. And I've come around on this full circle because for a long time I said, don't forget about ranks. Keywords are dead. But now maybe some sort of accurate rank score might help you to understand at least if Google likes your stuff or not, which then translates into your ability to show up.
Yeah, great takeaways there for that. And then prediction number 4, AI is forcing UGC platforms to separate feeds. This is really interesting. Yeah, tell us a little bit about identity spoofing and what you mean by this.
Yeah, it's funny because just today, Reddit announced that they're testing verified accounts, right? So they're going to basically give you a little badge if you can verify that you are human, especially for celebrities and stuff, right? But this is going to be a trend that I foresee for all UGC platforms because of AI basically expecting 2 separate feeds. There's going to be the AI slop feed where you get all the cool AI stuff. And I think some of that is actually going to be better than we make it out to seem. And then the other feed is going to be human only, where the input comes from humans that are verified. For example, LinkedIn does this with, I forgot the name. But anyway, there's a service where you have to submit a picture of your passport and your face next to it and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes even jumping on video with a real person. And so all of these social networks, I expect, will, and content platforms will have to verify their users because it is so easy to spam with AI. And yet, I don't think any platform wants to ban AI completely because some of that stuff is really good. So we're going to see 2 different feeds.
Yeah, really important to keep in mind as we move forward. And then rounding out the last few here, we have one on ChatGPT and then prediction on Perplexity as well. So what are you thinking about ChatGPT? Maybe an ad platform?
Yeah. I think this is maybe, I think a pretty, I don't even know, like this is been debated so much, covers so much, but I think it's pretty clear that OpenAI has to launch ads probably next year. I could be wrong. It could be 27. But based on all of their investments and need for cash flow, I think it makes sense. I think it will also raise the quality for free subscribers of ChatGPT. And then one of the second order outcomes is that it will give us some sort of insights into demand, whether that's topics, which is what I expect. I don't expect we'll see prompts because prompts are so noisy and so different, but I'm going to expect that we're going to see some sort of intent or topic. So, for example, if you're AirOps, maybe the demand platform will show you how often you show up, like the impressions for content refreshes, right? Or content as a topic, maybe. I expect that kind of information. And I also have a suspicion that we're going to be a little bit surprised about how many impressions there actually are. I think this is a little undervalued. I think the usage and engagement with ChatGPT is really high, higher than classic organic search. And by ChatGPT showing ads, we're not going to get more insights and some sort of like a search console for ChatGPT. I think it's also going to alleviate some advertising pressure from Google because right now as advertisers, you go to Alphabet or Meta and there's not really much else. And I think it's going to be very attractive for advertisers to find something that is maybe lower cost, but yields similar results.
Yeah, so what we're seeing here is like maybe if you're on the free tier, then there's some ads associated with it. And then a pro tier, maybe you don't have ads or maybe not see any at all.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then lastly, a bold prediction here, Perplexity sells. Yeah, give us some thoughts on this one. This would be big.
Yeah, I think Perplexity is in a tough spot. They're valued at a very high price. As far as I know, user growth has stalled. They have 30 million monthly active users, which doesn't even compare to ChatGPT's 900 weekly million active users, 900 million weekly active users. And so they're far behind, right? I think it's hard for them to differentiate. They've launched a Comet AI browser, which is cool, which I also use from time to time. But then they tried some ads and then quickly rolled back. So I think they're stuck. I think it's going to be really hard for them to grow into their valuation with all the competition. And on the other hand, you have some buyers that would make a lot of sense. I said Elon Musk and XAI could be a fit because Grok needs a strong data set of Citations, it's obviously spewing out a lot of half truths. And so something that is could be a validation layer would make a lot of sense. But then also Elon Musk wants to build a super app. So I think a Perplexity, it even has an X in the name, right? There's a fit in many ways. And then the other potential buyer could be a Larry Ellison from Oracle. They're trying to build a little bit of a media empire, making a big bid for Paramount Plus. They also are one of the two biggest stakeholders of TikTok in the US, right? So there could be a natural fit. But then also Salesforce. Salesforce has been, Mark Benioff and Salesforce have been on an acquisition spree, right? They have Slack, etc. And for them, they could turn Perplexity into an enterprise search that they license or sell as a product. So I could see these three buyers. I think 26 is going to be really tough for Perplexity, and like a sell is a logical move.
Yeah, it does seem like it's coming to a head of sorts. And so it'll be interesting to see which direction it goes. We're getting a lot of good questions in the Q&A. Keep adding them there. We're going to hit on these in the last 9 or 10 minutes that we have. But before we do that, I did want to bring up our offer again here. If you're ready to win AI search and claim your AI search strategy, you'll get to see examples of proven AI search workflows, preview our AirOps Insights dashboard that does show your share of voice, mention rate, citation rate, how you do stack up to competitors, as well as see example workflows on how you can take action on that. That's what we were referring to in prediction number 1 there. And you'll also get an action plan and the next steps that you can start taking. So feel free to scan the QR code or email us at growth@airops.com and put webinar in the subject line. Okay, everyone take a deep breath. I'm looking at our questions here. Kevin, are you ready for some questions?
Let's do it.
Okay, cool. One question I know that we all have from Ryan, just talking about AI visibility in general. How valuable is it working towards LLM visibility when traffic is often low? How should we start balancing optimizing for LLMs versus Google search, or should we even be thinking that way?
First of all, I think we're moving broadly from clicks to influence. ClickFunnel is dying. This old notion of search, click, convert is happening less. And look, like it's not dead yet, right? So we're in a transition period. I want to be careful with that. To some degree, this still works. But as you are creating content and optimized for search, you're fighting a downhill battle, right? So you have to, if traffic is your goal, I think it's a tough time. So what's the opposite of that? It is influence. And so the way you want to think about influence is how much can you influence purchase decision by being visible in the right context. So as we said earlier, when people are searching on ChatGPT for best workflow automation software, best content refresh solution, et cetera, like these are all critical questions where you want to be part of the answer, but not just part of the answer, but part of the answer in the right context. So if you're AirOps, you don't want to just be mentioned somewhere. You want to be mentioned as the best solution for that specific problem. That's what influence looks like. And right now, the best measures that we have are things like mentions and share of voice, right? I think it's important to not just have an absolute measure like mentions, but also have a relative one, because the reality is that the total number of possible citations and mentions changes over time. LLMs develop, and for example, in ChatGPT 5, for the first time, you had a model router, which decided based on your query, or a prompt better said, what type of model to take. And the model plays a massive role in the number of citations or mentions that are being present. So anyway, long story short, it's a shift to influence. And that can be a tough sell with leadership sometimes, right? I don't want to say, oh, it's just as simple as looking at different metrics. Is a whole change management process that we have to drive forward, whether we're in-house or agency side or a consultant or advisor.
Yeah, I think from my side, and just summing up a bit, is it really is that influence piece. So it is on-site content, but it's also that community influence, which we've already talked about a lot. It is that third-party citations and mentions that are all coming together because, again, these are conversations and not just like optimizing for one page.
Absolutely. Yep, exactly.
I really like this question. We're all familiar with EAT for like quality on Google. Is there anything similar that you're seeing for LLM visibility? Is there like another, what's the similarity to EEAT for LLMs?
So I did a couple of user behavior research studies this year where we recruited a panel of participants and then recorded their behavior when engaging with things like AI overviews or AI mode. and we tracked all the things they did. We also asked them to speak out loud what their thoughts were. So we gained a pretty deep understanding in how people engage with these modalities. And one common theme that we found is trust. Trust is the most important ingredient when it comes to behavior, period. So when users, for example, evaluate an AI overview, classic search results, SERP features, AI mode, trust is the number one filter. So they first ask themselves when they see an answer, hey, does this answer come from a reliable source? Do I know this? And do I trust this? And so I relate that to EAT because trustworthiness is one of the 4 parts of EAT, and it's also the most important part. And that is not my opinion. That is actually what Google writes explicitly in the quality rater guidelines. And so there's no difference in this trust filter or lens that people apply to classic search results compared to AI. They want to get the most trustworthy results. And also, they will validate AI responses with platforms that they trust. So what we see is that when users get an answer, they often go to Reddit or YouTube or other user platforms and see if people are saying the same thing there, right? Is the AI answer congruent with the quote unquote answer from a human? So trust is critical, people validate, and that means it's important to be top of mind for a target audience as early and as much as possible in a trustworthy way.
And that goes back into some of these other signals around like just brand building and people being aware of who you are to then have to build that trust and have good sentiment and good reviews on the offsite things to help people select your brand, for lack of a better word there.
Yeah.
To wrap up, I think this is really important as we're all thinking about 2026. I've got a couple questions here from Marlene and John. Marlene says that she needs to help connect like mentions and citations to a business case to help invest in digital PR. How are we starting to explain to the C-suite, to the CMO, to the CEO about mentions and citations really influencing traffic and brand?
It's really difficult because we don't know the exact value of a mention. That's the reality. And so the way that I approach this with my clients is we're taking a baseline of customers that are coming through ChatGPT or Perplexity, AI mode, et cetera, through self-reported attribution. So the first step is you want to add a step in the onboarding process when people sign up. If you're B2B, if people sign up for a software or become customers, you want to ask them how have you first heard about us. If you're an enterprise, then you want to make sure that the sales rep asks them what made them reach out or what decided them evaluate the software. And if you're in B2C, then you want to, after the sale, send a survey about like how have you heard about our brand, what made you sign up, et cetera, right? So self-reported attribution right now is the best source to understand how big the impact is of AI on your business. And you want to take a baseline and then correlate that baseline to your current share of voice, mentions, and citations, and then say, cool, if we're raising that to a certain level, we expect that baseline of self-attributed customers to then also raise. Now, where it gets, this in itself is tricky, but it's also tricky because of the time horizons, right? We don't know how high the lag is. So if you're raising, say, your share of voice by 5%, 8 weeks, will you also raise your customers coming from AI by 5% in 8 weeks? Probably not. And we don't know how much the lag there is. So I don't have a good answer there, but that would be my approach to making the business case.
Yeah, I'm starting to track branded impressions as well and just looking at how often people are searching for AirOps as a brand. I think overall that could also be a metric to help folks. Is your like branded search also increasing, even though we all know that these are imperfect systems as we talked about, but that's something else that I'm really focused on too. Yeah, I hope that gives some people some really great insights and ways to move forward. Again, I'll put this recording together, we'll put a recap together so everyone on the call can review it and analyze and review these really great insights that we've had. I'll also put in a couple of great conversations I've had over the past year, along with some search trends that I've also seen over the past year. So really appreciate everyone joining us. If you want to see more from Kevin, again, go to his growth memo. It's a great source of information on how search is changing. If you want some more information about AirOps, feel free to email us at growth@airops.com. This is going to be our last webinar for 2025. It's been a crazy year from the webinar perspective. Kevin, I think you were on maybe 3 times, so really appreciate all of your insights and the conversations that we've had this year. Thanks so much for your time today.
Man, Josh, I just want to say one thing real quick. I've been able to see your progression of doing these webinars over time. As you mentioned, I've been on for 3 times, and you were always good, but man, you've come such a long way. The way you hosted today and the way you lead to this webinar is just A plus. So shout out to you, man.
Really appreciate that. And we've got a stacked roster for January. If you have somebody, in the audience, if there's somebody you want to see, be sure and let me know. You can find me on LinkedIn or feel free to email me and I'll look into that guest as well. But Kevin, happy holidays. Happy New Year. We'll see you on the other side sometime.
Same to you. See you in 26.